Hey, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky, and today we have Andy Paul joining us. Andy, welcome.
Michael, thank you for having me.
So, Andy, you are an author. You have a podcast. We have more than one podcast. You're a speaker, consultant, founder of the Sales House as well. You've consulted for a whole bunch of well-known organizations around the world, including Square, Philips, Grubhub, and others. And your latest book, which we're going to talk a lot about here today, Sell Without Selling, is all about how to win at sales without the salesy behaviors that buyers hate. And I think everybody listening will be disappointed because we all love things that are salesy. So
yeah, please be more salesy.
There we go. Right. So great to have you on. Why don't we start this off? We're going to talk about how to sell without selling and how consultants can really master the sales process and win more business consistently. Before we do that, though, take me back to your early days, Andy. How did you get into sales? Where did this journey for you begin?
Just straight out of college, sort of like many people, just sort of fell into it because I had nothing better to do, no real plan. And yeah, I mean, no inkling. If you had asked me 2 or 3 months before I actually joined this first company I worked with, Burroughs, at the time the second largest computer company in the world. Yeah, if you had asked me if I was going into sales, I would have looked at you funny. It's like it wasn't even in my mind. I'm neither positive nor negative.
Right. And if our research here is correct, your boss at that time, or one of your bosses, said to you that you weren't being salesy enough.
Well, yeah, sales trainer. So in my book, which I'll just small correction, it's Sell Without Selling Out.
Thank you.
And we'll get into why that distinction is important. But it's my first sales training, professional sales training, sent by this company to a big regional training center, and people were all over the country there. And the trainer's takeaway was, I was too analytical. I wasn't salesy enough. I wasn't going to make it in sales. And I think that really propelled me on this journey that's where I am today, which is, we don't all have to be that way in order to succeed. In fact, no one has to be that way in order to succeed in sales.
Do you know that so you got this feedback from the sales trainer, hey, Andy, you're not being salesy enough. How did you take that? And then what did you do at that time? I mean, now you've written the book, you've done a lot of work in sales, but take us back to that kind of earlier time in your sales career. What happened?
Well, I'd already determined in the sales training class, I was watching these videos that the company showed you about sales method they wanted us to use, and this really sort of slick haired con man salesperson that was the subject matter expert. And I just had said to myself, it's like, first of all, what human being acts this way? And two is not me. I can't act that way, and I'm not going to. So if I wanted to avoid having one of the world's shortest careers in sales, I was going to have to find a way to make sales work for me. And I said that really was the start of that journey. Otherwise, I would have been out very quickly.
Where does that mindset come from? I mean, so you accepted that, number one, you were not going to leave that job. You're saying to yourself, okay, I need to figure out how to make this work for me. I'm not going to do this the way that they are. So where does that come from? Because I think a lot of people in that same situation would just go, clearly I'm not going to be successful in this role because the superior, right, the sales trainer is telling me I need to do it this way, but that way just doesn't feel right to me. So a lot of people would have exited at that moment. You didn't. Why?
Well, probably a complex series of reasons. One, not wanting to have to go tell my parents that I lasted less than 2 weeks on my first job. But also just sort of a combination of stubbornness and curiosity, right? Is a very competitive individual. I thought, hey, there has to be a way to do this that didn't require me to act in a way that was completely out of alignment with who I am as a person or was as a person. And just sort of that sense of challenge to say, I can do this, right? And so it's something you grow into as you get experience, a little more success, but it involves pushing back at various junctures in your career with against managers who are saying, yeah, this is what you need to do, and saying, I think there's a better way. Hold me accountable for results. Judge me on the results, not on how I get it done. And yeah, just find a better way that was perceived by the buyers to be a more positive experience and less manipulative, pushy, persuasion-driven, salesy behaviors.
When you say that you were competitive, what does that look like? Were you in sports or some other? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in high school, college, had done some sports, running, swimming, played soccer, but I don't know, it's just hate to lose, and I would have considered that a big loss had I been sort of forced to change careers so quickly. And maybe part of it too is I just didn't feel, I was a history major. What was I going to do? I mean, if I already had a job, you keep the job that you had. Who knows what you could do with a history major?
So you have this understanding that you want to be successful in the sales role. You're not going to do it the way that you're being told that you should, because it doesn't feel right to who you are as a person, how you'd want to operate. Where do you go from there? How do you then begin to develop the skills so that you can be successful in this role when the advice that you're getting is not what you want to follow? Like where do you actually take your next steps?
Sure. Well, what you do is you listen to your customers, your buyers, right?
How do you know that though? I mean, you were just a young guy. Where that knowledge come from?
I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, I was sort of fortunate that I had bosses that gave me the leeway to go experiment and try things, and I did. I looked at what the other people in my branch office, which there were, 13, 14 other salespeople there, what they were doing that was working for them, and sort of cherry picking the things I thought might align with how I thought I could be best be successful. But it was just a lot of experimentation, and within the experimentation, still achieving the results that were expected of me. And yes, I guess I was fortunate early on to have a couple bosses sort of gave me enough rope to hang myself. But at the same time, what it did is gave me the freedom and the comfort to say, yeah, different way to do this. And for me, as I was starting to say before, the big influences early on really were my customers. I mean, as much as my bosses, is I found that my buyers actually teach me how to sell to them. If I went in and with sort of this open mind, curiosity driven, there to serve, there to help, not putting my interests ahead of theirs. I mean, certainly I want to hit my numbers, but heard Zig Ziglar and others sort of, say, hey, you get everything you want out of life if you get enough, help enough other people get what they want out of life, and just start there. And so I was this young kid, knew nothing about business. I like to say I was 21. I looked 16. And I was selling into the construction industry, talking to a lot of CEOs, founders of these construction companies, heavy construction companies, and they were giving me their time. And as I started wondering, why are they giving me their time? Well, it's because I was coming in, I was truly interested in learning about their challenges and what we could do to help them. And I was fortunate to have a couple customers sort of mentor me through somewhat complex sales to say, this is what I need to know. These are the types of things that would help us, and just sort of providing a little bit of a roadmap for me.
Do you think that part of that was because you were young? Like if you were, let's say 40, and trying to do the same thing, reaching out to new prospective clients in an industry that you're not that familiar with, and you're trying to sell to them, right? Or to at least that's your role. Do you think you would have had the same kind of success in having people taking you under their wing and teach you and be so open to that? Or do you think it was really your age that kind of gave you a bit of an advantage?
That's a great question. I don't think age might have been a somewhat of a factor, but I don't think it was decisive. I think that was just coming in as an open mind. And the way most sellers, even today, still act is, regardless of product or service you might be selling, is you come into the buyers with this assumption that they need what you have. And it's like, well, I'm pitching before I'm really understanding.
Right.
And yeah, I sort of was always sort of conscious of not, not getting ahead of myself and not wanting to be exposed. And the best way to not be exposed is to, not represent yourself to be more than you are. And so I think to some degree, couple of the customers liked the idea they were sort of helping to mold this younger person. But I think anybody that comes into a new situation, because I certainly age 40, I was helping start new companies and in new situations, selling products I'd never sold before, categories of products I'd never sold before. Yeah, if you go in with that open mind and just show that you're interested first and foremost in what's important to the buyer, I think age is not a factor. I think they want to spend time with you because they think, okay, here's somebody that might give me a perspective or share a perspective with me that I don't have.
I'd love to make this very or as practical and kind of tangible as possible for everyone. Sure. Can you explain maybe the difference between what you see people doing when, so let's take our world, consultants who are going out, they want to ultimately, sell and serve and make an impact and make money and all that kind of stuff. But what do you see as the difference between somebody who has the wrong approach, where they're maybe trying to sell too quickly or pitch too quickly, and what does the right approach look like? So if you are coming in with a curious mind, what is that language? How do you get in front of a prospective ideal client in a way where they're going to actually be open enough or wanting to have a conversation with you if they know that you are a salesperson or they know that you are trying to offer them your services?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't hide from the fact that you are trying to sell something, right? I mean, as soon as you start doing that, then defenses get raised on the part of the buyers. So let's look at the sort of the framework of what I lay out in the book is you can be selling out or selling in, and you want to sell without selling out is the title. And selling out is most succinctly, it's when a person selling puts their own interests ahead of those of the buyer, right? So I'm here to sell you something. I'm going to pitch before I understand. I'm going to default to these persuasion-driven techniques that I've learned that have no value for the buyer. In fact, we know from research that people, human beings, universally, 100% resist being persuaded. And so in the book, I say, when you default to that, you're selling out, and people put their defenses up. The opposite of that is what I call selling in. And it's based on 4 innate human behaviors: connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity, that are really focused on, instead of saying your job is to go persuade a potential client to buy your services, your perspective is instead, the mindset you should have is, my job is to go out and listen to that prospective client, understand the things that are most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve by addressing those challenges, and then help them get that. So one is selling out. I'm persuading you to buy what I have. The other one is, nope, I'm listening to understand what you really need, what's most important to you, and then I'm going to help you get that. And that mindset difference dictates dramatically different motions or behaviors on the part of the person selling.
I've seen very different kind of 2 viewpoints on this. So one is if you are selling into an organization and let's say it's somebody in the C-suite, they're very stretched, thin on time. They're not going to give their time to somebody unless it really makes sense for them. So if you're coming in and the positioning is, hey, I have something very important to share with you, some unique insights. So essentially, like I'm crafting a bit of a pitch. They're more likely to give you their time because they want to hear what you have to say. But the other viewpoint is, as you're kind of mentioning, and I want to hear your kind of pushback or how you filter this through. But the other side is, I'm not coming with a very specific agenda. Like, I'm here to listen and learn from you, to be open. But that approach to somebody in the C-suite, it's like, hey, I'm not going to just have a conversation because I want to, teach you. You need to come in with value for me. So how do you kind of view those 2 different perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that's the right way to split the difference, right? Because I mean, the fact
please go ahead.
I'm coming in with questions. I still have a product and service I sell, right? But it's what am I demonstrating first off? What I'm demonstrating first off is, some people say, your point, you come in, have this concise pitch. Actually, I think most effective way to lead off, and I talk about this in the book, is with a question. For instance, I've got 6 different types of questions or more, but 6 that I talk about as being core question types to use to deploy it with your curiosity. One is called insight question. So for me, when I'm talking to prospective customers, I lead with an insight question. Insight question is you're going to ask the buyer something about their business that they reasonably should be expected to know, but very probably don't.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And so when I'm talking to CEOs and I'm selling sales consulting, one of the things I'm really focused on is productivity. So I'll ask a CEO, so tell me, how many sales hours on average does it take you to move one of your average customers from initial point of contact to a close?
And most can't answer that, right? They have no clue.
They don't. But some they say, yeah, well, I don't know that. Should I know that? Why is that important? And then we have that conversation.
Love it. Yeah. Great example.
So, and how do you come up with these insight questions is, well, you're a little experienced in your business. You've talked to other clients. You've worked with other clients. If you're selling a product, oftentimes I find almost 100% of the time is the customer actually has found a use case for your product or service that they hadn't thought about during the sales process. Understand what that is, so you can then use that as a new perspective or insight to share with the buyer. But leading with questions is a good way to get started with a C-level person.
And is there any kind of sales practice that just really rubs you the wrong way? Like it's just so outdated, just terrible, makes you cringe. What are 1 or 2 of those that come to mind for you?
Well, it is this, pitch before understand, right? People that don't do any preparation for a meeting or just do superficial understanding or not even a meeting for initial outreach, right? I mean, if you're the way I look at it, sort of building what you said before is our buyers have a limited amount of time and attention. And so when we ask them to consume some of that time and attention, they're making an investment in us. They're investing that time and attention in us. They need an ROI on that investment. They need a return. So if you do superficial preparation or no preparation, and let's just say you're just doing a cold outreach to someone, and you don't evince any sort of level of interest in their business or them as individuals, how's it going to strike them? Hey, I'm investing my time in you. Even just reading this email, as a complete waste.
Totally.
So are you going to get any more? And sort of the classic tale I like to tell, and this has happened to me twice, because as you mentioned before, I have a podcast. We've done over 1,050 episodes so far to date. Someone reached out to me on LinkedIn, direct message saying, hey, Andy, I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn, and I think you'd be a great candidate to start a podcast. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, come on. Right? You said you were on LinkedIn, looked at my profile, which you clearly didn't do because you couldn't miss the fact that I have a large podcast. So I don't tend to reply to people on those things, but I couldn't resist. And so I wrote back, I said, hey, come on, you're on LinkedIn. I'm a sales trainer. What are you doing? Why wouldn't you actually look at profile? He says, oh, yeah, we don't have time. Right.
It's that whole thing. I talk with clients a lot about this. It's the value over volume, or what most people do is volume over value, right? It's right. I'm going to try and automate my way because I can get in front of more people. It's a numbers game. It's completely backwards, right? That's fine. Maybe if you're selling to consumers or a whole different approach, but if you're selling higher valued services, right, you better make sure that you're taking some time to understand who you're trying to build a relationship with.
Yeah. Well, now the other way to sort of think about value too is, and I talk about this in the book, is the most easy way for sellers of any stripe to think about value is it equals progress, meaning that as a result of interacting with you or whatever you sent to the buyer, an email or whatever, if as a result of that, they're closer to making their decision than they were before that, then there was value.
Yeah.
If they're not, there was no value. And it's just a simple way to think about every time you reach out to ask the buyer to consume some of their time. Are they going to be closer as a result of consuming it? Are they going to be closer making a decision?
Well, let's dive deeper into your book, Andy.
Sure.
You talk about, and I know we've maybe hit on some of these already, but I want to make sure that we really give them what they deserve. You talk about kind of ways to build trust or to establish, rapport really quickly with buyers. What are some of the best practices you found that could help consultants to build a relationship or to establish trust faster with a buyer?
Well, the first thing is, and I think it's just a rule that everybody should remember, which is to make yourself interesting to someone, be interested in them.
Mm.
And this gets back to the preparation we talked about. It gets back to maybe perhaps leading with questions that are informed questions with the buyer. It shows that you're interested, you are curious. Yes, it's not admitting that you know the answer, which is what the pitch is basically saying. We know the answer before we even understand. Yes, deploy your curiosity, be interested in the other person. That's a great way to start building that connection.
Right.
Because again, you're saying it's about you, not about me. And, even in your conversation that you have with buyers, those simple sort of things that I talk about in the book is, for instance, this is very common with salespeople. They may ask a question to the buyer says, oh yeah, we've got this problem, this is sort of what's, the impact of it has been. And sellers will oftentimes default to, oh yeah, well, we have a customer, just like that's done this. What you've done is you've gone from listening to them to talking about yourself again.
Mm.
And so instead, a better thing to say is, well, tell me, what's been the impact of that problem, that challenge you've had? What's that meant to you? From a dollar perspective, what's that meant from you personally in the way you do your job? Is keep the focus on them, dig a little bit deeper on that. So when you do this thing, it's like, oh yeah, you sound just like this other client we've had. What you're doing is you're shifting. It's called a shift response. You're shifting the focus away from them onto you, where what you want to do is what's called a support response, where you want to understand more, right? Because it's only by really understand what's important to you can I really help you.
Where is the appropriate place to bring in other client kind of case studies, stories, ways of demonstrating that you have helped somebody similar? When's that right time or the appropriate time to do that?
Well, I think certainly early on, right? I mean, but don't do it in response to when you've asked a question, the customer said, this is what's bothering us. I think instead you're going to talk lessons you've learned from other customers that you're talking to, right? We've been working with a number of clients in your space. These are some of the common challenges. Maybe you haven't surfaced everything you think could be their primary challenge yet because you're sort of first call. How do some of those resonate with you?
Mm.
But you talk about, I think it's more effective to say, we've worked with this one client. They've really had this issue is demonstrate your expertise by talking a little more broadly. We're working with a number of customers in this space, and these are sort of this common things we've discovered. Are you encountering any of those challenges yourself?
Another thing that you talk about in your book is how you can accelerate the sales process, right? Essentially kind of help buyers to make decisions faster. Could you share with us, a couple of those ideas of how can consultants go about, making sales faster, getting to the decision faster? Right.
So it takes a little bit of in-depth explanation, if you can, is there's a gentleman, a Nobel Prize laureate, Herbert Simon, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, wrote about decision-making. And he's found that when he came up with what we call this theory of bounded rationality, and he said that when people go to make decisions, they have three constraints. We all have three constraints. One is we don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited access to information. We don't have unlimited understanding of the information we see. And what he found is that in those situations, which is the common everyday situation, what people do is when they have a challenge or problem they're trying to fix, is they'll research their alternatives until they find a solution that satisfies their requirements and suffices to enable them to achieve their desired outcomes. And when they do that, they make their decision. And that is the classic good enough decision. And what Simon found, he created a new word that can join satisfies and suffices, called satisficers. And said people satisfice because they make the rational calculation that, look, I could spend another 30, 60, 90 days investigating potential solutions to this challenge we have. And I'm not going to come back with anything that's so markedly better that it's worth the additional investment of my time and attention. So what I have is good enough. We're going to do it. And the key then to being able to reach the good enough decision, as I lay out in the book, is there are these various milestones. Is if you can be because again, being first helps in this case. So if you can be the first to form that connection, that trust-based connection with the buyer, if you can be the first to reach the level of understanding of what's truly most important to the buyer, you can be the first to work with them to create, like term in the book, this vision of success, right? So when customers make a decision to purchase your consulting services or a product or service of other sorts, when they make that decision, what are they buying? They're not buying the service, they're buying the vision of what that service is going to do for them. Right. So if you're the first to get to that, you co-create the vision of success with the buyer. If you're the first to that, well, Forrester Research did a study 8, 9, maybe 10 years ago at this point about this. And they said, look, if you are the seller, they were doing a study in the IT space, but they said, if you are the seller that gets the buyer to buy into your vision of success first, your odds of winning the business stand at like 65%, which is pretty huge, right?
Yeah.
So you have these milestones that, if I can be the first to connect, the first to understanding, the first to the vision of success, then chances are I'm going to help the buyer get to that point where they make the good enough decision. And where this really becomes more compelling even today than it was 30, 40 years ago when Simon was developing this theory, this philosophy, is that increasingly products and services are perceived to be, the differences between them are perceived to be razor thin by most of our buyers, right? I mean, if there's one sales consultant, there's a million sales consultants, or if there's one sales trainer, there's a million sales trainers, or if there's, one piece of software for, one CRM system, there's a million CRM systems, right?
Sure.
So if in the mind of the buyer, the differences are so thin between these products, what then becomes the tiebreaker? Well, the tiebreaker becomes their experience with you as a seller. It's the quality of their buying experience as they judge it. And so this idea of really making sure you're sort of first to connect, first to deploy your curiosity, ask these great questions, they start becoming substantive tiebreakers. So it's about you at the end of the day, less about what you sell, and it's about you.
I really like that. I mean, so the first to connect, I think could seem a bit scary to many people because it feels like you have to rush to get in front of, your ideal clients. But what I heard you say as a follow-on to that is that even if you're dealing with a client that has an existing consulting firm, right, some kind of an incumbent that's serving them, if you can be the first to help them to connect new dots, help them to see things, experience things, help them to create that vision of success as you talked about, I mean, that's vast opportunity for everybody out there, is to figure out how you can show up and how you can create that kind of experience, how you can add new value, provide new insights, provide new perspectives, provide new ideas, ultimately serve that buyer at a level that they haven't been served before, and just make that whole experience so valuable.
Exactly. And that's what they're looking for, right? Is this is why I think one thing that makes this good enough decision so powerful. I actually had experienced that so many times in my career before I had read about Simon and had the words to sort of put to it, is I knew I was winning deals before I thought I should have, right? It's like, oh, wait a second, we have like a couple more months to go. And it wasn't that I was actually getting the order from the customer. I was getting their buy-in that this was the direction they were going to go. So I called it winning the sale before I won the order. But I had won. And what I discovered is because I'd really sort of consciously tried to sort of front load the value in my selling process, is be ultra responsive to the customer when they had questions and concerns, or if there was an inbound lead, be ultra super responsive to that. Make sure being truly responsive in the sense that I'm not just getting back to you quickly, I'm getting back to you with the information you need, right? I was being the classic definition of responsive.
Right.
And what I found is, wow, yeah, people were making these decisions, and I was small companies working a lot of startups, competing against really big tech companies, and we were winning these deals that didn't seem like we should be winning. But it was all based on that, as we were helping them. We were giving value to them by helping them make progress through their buying process that the others weren't. And that gave us a lot of trust and credibility.
So it sounds like on one side, you have this best practice, or the place that people should be focused, which is how can you create that experience that truly adds value for the buyer, where you're giving even more than you might initially plan or expect to. It's, you're just fully serving them. You're being responsive. You're being detailed in your responses. You're showing up. The opposite to that is the firm or the company or the person that appears and maybe tries to hold back some information. Their focus is much more on transaction, where they're just trying to get the yes, they're trying to move things forward. They're not giving as much as they can. And I'd just be interested in your perspective on this, Andy, because I think people that are in that latter scenario that aren't giving as much, they're not maybe providing as much detail. There's fear that if they give too much, that the buyer won't need them, or there's fear that if they wait too long and don't try and quote unquote close the deal, they might miss that opportunity. So what advice would you have just in terms of how you show up? And, is there ever a time to try and kind of push that sale forward to get a decision faster? Or do you really just give? And when the time is right, the buyer will say, hey, yes, like I'm ready now to move forward. So how do you balance those two?
Right. So it's not give, right? What is it's giving with an agenda. And I talk about this in the book, is generosity is one of the 4 pillars of selling in. And it starts again with this premise, as Zig Ziglar said about, if you help enough other people achieve what's important to them, you achieve what's important to you. So buyers aren't under any illusion about the fact that that you're there to sell something to them. And people want to try to hide behind that. And one of the ways they sort of do that is by just being what I call an unrestrained giver, meaning I'm going to give everything to you, right? I'm going to give everything and just hope something sticks. And you see this all the time. Instead, is you want to be able to ask and answer 2 questions about every opportunity you're working on, the qualified opportunities you're working on, which is question 1, what does the buyer need from me in order to make progress toward making their decision? And 2, as a result of having received that from me, what are the next steps they'll commit to take? And you should be able to answer that about every opportunity you're working on at every point in time. What does the buyer need from me next, right now, in order to make progress toward making a decision? And so it puts the onus on you as a seller, whether you're a consultant or a CEO or a salesperson, is to be very intentional in the way you interact with your buyers. Is not just give. It's what do you need from me right now, based on your current situation, based on my level of understanding of you and your level of understanding of me. What do you need now to help you make progress toward making a decision?
Is that something?
It's operating with that level of intent,
right?
That's really separates people, sellers, from those who are helping the buyers achieve the things that are important to them, and those that are just sort of pushing their products.
And how much of this process, if any, are you mapping out with the buyer? Like, is the best practice to say, here's the process that we're going to go through together at some point in that conversation, so that you kind of know what those milestones are that you're going to be helping them to get clarity on? Or are you keeping that agenda more to yourself as the seller, where you're just trying to kind of go through things, that things will line up? How much of that is a collaborative, intentional kind of dialogue between you and the buyer?
It should be collaborative, and you should be able to paint out an account plan if you want, or an action plan, mutual action plan. But the thing is, sometimes sellers gravitate to those and get too hamstrung by what they've laid out, thinking of this is the process the buyer's going through. And that's not the process the buyer is going through. Buyers, while you have something that you sell and you sell repeatedly, you've sort of developed a selling process. You may be selling something buyers buy once every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a documented process for that. So yes, it's good to map out with a buyer what you think based on your experience working with other buyers of the product or service. This is what typically happens, but don't get locked into that, right? It's really important. Again, the whole level of intentionality is you stay in touch with exactly what the buyer does need based on your conversations with them, as opposed to this process plan you've mapped out, because at some point they may diverge. Right. And one of the real, in my mind, one of the biggest causes of the sort of this crisis of performance we're having in B2B sales is that people just want to make everything, sort of lockstep in this process. Instead of saying, yeah, the process is important, but almost never maps to reality, right? It's a framework, not a recipe. Yeah. And you need to have that flexibility, the intellectual humility to say, yeah, this is diverging. And if it's diverging, yeah, do I really understand what the buyer is really trying to accomplish? Or do I just assume I do? And I need to figure out, right? I need to ask more questions, make sure I really get to that level of understanding. And then you can stay on track, make sure you're still aligned with where they're going. But Gartner put out 3-4 years ago now, their famous sort of flow chart about the buyer enablement, the buyer journey. And it's this hugely complex flow chart that starts and stops and starts all over again. It's like, yeah, buyers sort of, this is generally what they do, but it's kind of made up as they go along.
Yeah. So, Andy, you've put out a lot of content over the years. You have a massive following on LinkedIn. You have almost 200,000 people that follow you there. How did you do that? What were the kind of the steps, or if your LinkedIn, kind of platform, or what your profile there was a book, what do the chapters look like that you've kind of gone through to get to 200,000 followers?
That's a great question. I mean, it starts with this commitment to being a creator. I don't think anybody builds a following if they're not a creator on LinkedIn. And that's means that you're creating content of one type or another on a very consistent basis and sharing it with the people on the platform. And for me, that really got started with my podcast back in 2015, as I had a pretty small number of followers at that point and hadn't really been focused on it, but started this podcast. We quickly grew to 5 episodes a week, and we putting out a podcast post, or a LinkedIn post, on every podcast episode. And they were good episodes. People enjoyed the content, and it just started building from there. And yeah, I think even to today, we typically post, as I create the content, but my son is my partner, our business partner. He posts it. He's the LinkedIn expert. 2 to 3 times a day.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are periods, perhaps it's just one, but there's always at least one, and oftentimes more. And it's just having that commitment to creating content that people engage with.
Yeah.
And that's the other part, is as you get into it and you start doing that, is you need to use a tool like Shield or some others that track the analytics. And if there's a certain type of content people are engaging with, then hey, write more of that.
Yeah. I love that answer, because so often people will say, like, well, what's the strategy to get a great response on LinkedIn? And what essentially I'm hearing you say, Andy, which is, well, you try a lot of stuff. You see what works, and then you do more of the stuff that works and less of the stuff that doesn't work.
Right.
Right. Most people are looking for that one kind of like silver bullet. They try something, it doesn't work, then they stop doing it. Right. And then they haven't even given it a real shot. But I'm hearing from you, or I think of Seth Godin when we're talking right now about, just putting something out every single day. If you're being consistent, that a lot of it is not gonna stick. It's not gonna make as big of an impact, but some things will. And the things that do are gonna, like venture capital or angel investing. It's like most of the things that you invest in are not going to work out, but those that do, like, you're gonna have a percentage that account for everything plus some.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've got posts that have had 600,000, interactions. Yeah. Most don't.
Right.
So, but yeah. And we try to be very deliberate about what we're doing and try to stay on brand, just because promoting a book and the lessons behind the book that we think are important. So yeah, between the podcast and just other posts, it's just being, I said, very consistent on it. And you could even make an argument that I should be posting more frequently. But it's yeah, the consistency is really the key.
I want to ask you about this, Andy, because you mentioned the podcast a couple of times. You had a podcast that was called Selling with Purpose that lasted, I think, for about 6 months, according to LinkedIn. And I'm interested because today you have 2 podcasts. It looks like you're still active with, according to LinkedIn. Is that correct?
No. So I started my podcast in 2015 called Accelerate with Andy Paul.
Okay.
And in early 2020, that podcast was acquired by a company called Revenue.io. And then it was renamed to Sales Enablement with Andy Paul. So that's sort of just the continuation of that first one.
Okay.
Selling with Purpose was actually just a limited series that we did sort of June, July of 2020.
Gotcha.
Talking to sales leaders about how the pandemic had affected them and their sales efforts. And so it was just a single episode or single 6 episode arc, and yeah, just special purpose.
Got you. I'm glad that you clarified that. What was it like selling a podcast or having a podcast being acquired? Like what did that look like?
It was very unexpected, for one. And I think for the acquiring company, for Revenue.io, is I saw a lot of value in the thought leadership and aligned with the product that they were selling and the philosophy of the CEO. And then also there's this huge archive of content that we went back and we optimized for search. And yeah, it's a great traffic driver as well for Revenue.io on their website. So it's sort of the mix of those two things. And that is.
And is that in that case,
unexpected.
Is that they are purchasing the podcast as the asset, or they're also purchasing, you delivering the podcast? Like if you said, hey, I'm not going to run that podcast anymore, does that deal still hold, or are you kind of a bundled inside? Like you need to still be active in that podcast in order to get whatever they were paying for it?
Yeah, no, I think that they would like me to stay involved with it for sure. Because as podcasts, as you know, is the relationship is with the host. Yeah, it's not with the show. As I do a lot of mentoring of people that are starting podcasts or new in podcasting, and I tell them, I said, just remember, you're the star of the show. People are going to come back because they form a relationship with you, or if it's you and a co-host, with you and the co-host, not because of the show. And there's a reason it's called Jimmy Kimmel Live or Late Night with Stephen Colbert, because that's what people tune in. That's who people tune in to see.
Right.
So yeah, in general, a podcast it's the host. And we've been very fortunate, formed strong relationship with lots and lots of people. Yeah. And they keep coming back and listening.
So Andy, a couple of questions here before we wrap up, and then we'll make sure that people can learn more about you and of course the book. So you have a podcast now, over 1,000+ episodes. You have, the work that you do, the book that you've written. What's one or two kind of habits that you have on a daily basis that you find are critical to your productivity, your performance, your focus, just being able to be successful? Are there maybe one or two things that come to mind that you just do on a regular basis?
Part of it is personal. Yeah. Exercise on a disciplined basis and stay healthy as much as I can. I think that's really important. So I love to bicycle and run and swim. I haven't so much the last 2 years, but just sort of fitness nut in that regard.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's important. yeah, from a business standpoint, sort of two things. I think one is I read a lot all the time, and I don't know. I don't think I can overestimate how important that is.
And what do you read? Because my next question is actually going to be, in the last 6 months or so, what's one book, fiction or nonfiction, that you really enjoyed and would recommend? So that's my question for you. But I'm interested to know, like, are you reading always nonfiction, business, sales, philosophy? Like, kind of give us a sense of what you're actually reading.
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, depending on so I make a commitment. If an author comes on my podcast, I read their book. So depending on the year, I may read 50 to 100 sales / marketing / business books.
Sure.
And some are good. There's a really good one. I don't know, it's a little over 6 months or so ago, but
that's okay.
A book called A Minute to Think by Juliet Funt, which was a great book about, not really time management, but setting aside time in your day, sort of what's called white space, to just think, and which I think doesn't get enough focus from business people in general.
I agree.
And it talks about how to manage email more effectively and so on. But it was really a very interesting book. But there've been a number of people who have written interesting books I've interviewed on the show. But I try to scan lots of different news sources during the day. And I've done this my entire professional career. I mean, it used to be in print form, now it's all online. But I'd always be subscribing probably to 3 newspapers. I always had Wall Street Journal, local newspaper, and either one of New York Times or LA Times that I would just scan. And it's just sort of do the same thing now, except do it online. And I think in my sales career, where that was important is that I was always able to talk to people about things that might be important to them.
Right.
Because I was just maybe more well-informed than average, but nonetheless. And I always found, and I was selling to people around the world. I spent 15 years of my career traveling extensively internationally. And that came from just being curious about other things. So that reading, hugely important. Something I've read in the last 6 months, actually, just on Hawaii for a few days. I read volume 1 of Rick Atkinson's trilogy on the American Revolution. He had written the trilogy about World War II, which was fantastic just a few years ago. His first volume of this one called The British Are Coming. And I love political history, I love military history. So I try to read about that. And then I sprinkle in some detective novels and stuff like that in between. I love mystery fiction.
Awesome. Well, we're going to link all up in the show notes, but I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your book.
Sure.
And andypaul.com, is that the best place for people to go to learn more? Or is there a dedicated website, or where should we send them?
I mean, andypaul.com is great. I mean, LinkedIn is really, I encourage people to go there first and foremost, connect with me there, follow my content. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. andypaul.com, information about the book. You can download a free chapter. I would take a little fun assessment we have of if there's a spectrum with selling out on one end and selling in on the other, sort of get to see where you sit on that spectrum between the two. And listen to my podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, or buy my book anywhere books are sold, online, Amazon, other places.
There we go. We'll have all that in the show notes. Andy, thank you again so much for coming on. Really appreciate you sharing some of this with us. And again, congratulations on your book.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been fun. Appreciate it.